You're listening to the Radius Church podcast, recorded live each Sunday in North Hollywood, California.
So, we talk about two different kinds of family that you have in your life. The family that you get, and then the family that you choose. The family that you got, biologically you were born into one, or maybe you were adopted into one. And then there's the family that along the way you choose for yourself. You choose for your life. Now, some of us, you would say you're fortunate enough that you would choose the family that you also got, or you would choose some or most of the family that you got. But all of us have felt the need to augment the family that we were born into or adopted into with friends or with the team that you're building a dream with, or obviously your romantic lives are building on. Hopefully you're not within your biological family. We've got people available for prayer up at the front at the end of the service if that's your particular predicament. But some of us, all of us, have felt the need to augment the family that we got with a family that we would choose. Some of us, because of the difficulty that we've experienced, and this might be your story, you have felt the need to completely replace the family that you got with a healthier family or a stronger family that you would choose. This series is dedicated to trying to find and build that tight network of social connections or relationships. Maybe you would call it your tribe or your village. Maybe you would call it your family. The series is dedicated to trying to build and find the family that you would choose, that your future self would tell your present self to please choose because your future needs it. I shudder to think how my life would have turned out had I stayed with the girl that I was dating in college. I've shared this story before, so don't try and steal my thunder and give away the punchline too early if you've heard this, but it perfectly illustrates what we're going to talk about today. I was dating a girl that I thought was it. The sun rose and set on this girl. I was pretty sure at the wise old age of 19 that I was going to make babies with this girl and grow old with this girl, and that our heartbeats would end at the same time at the end of our lives because we had a love for the ages. That's who this was. There was a problem, though, that still existed, and that was that no matter how often we went out on dates, she still never wanted to cross the line of saying that we were boyfriend and girlfriend. And I thought that was a necessary step towards the future that I envisioned for us. But she, no matter how much I asked for it, talked about it, brought it up, hounded her about it, she hesitated. I'm just not ready for that quite yet. And then there was this one day I was in my dorm room and she called me on the landline of my dorm room, which is a sentence you won't hear for very much longer. She did, and I remember the tone of her voice was very focused and very serious, and she said, "Joseph, I need to meet you at this table near the cafeteria." And so I just thought, this is it. This is going to be that define the relationship conversation that I have been waiting for. So I cleaned myself up. I put on way too much cologne, and I rushed down to the cafeteria, and I was there a little bit early. There was somebody sitting at the table I was supposed to meet her at, but that's okay. We can figure out when she gets there. But she was a few minutes late, which was par for the course for her. And the guy that was sitting at the table decides, we're both sitting here, why don't I spark up a conversation? So he says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm just waiting for a girl." And he says, "Oh, it's so funny, so am I." And that's how I know most of you haven't heard this story. So she's still running behind, and we keep talking, and he's a really nice guy. We hit it off immediately. She shows up, and the first surprising thing was that she asked me to sit down at the table without asking him to leave. The other thing that was surprising is that he clearly gave the impression that he was expecting not just a girl, but the same girl. So I sit down at the table, and then she sits down between us and just looks down at the tabletop. And she says, "I have a confession. I have been seriously dating both of you at the same time." If that wasn't devastating enough, then she says, "And it's kind of working out for me." So if it's okay with you, I'd like to just keep it that way. So then there was a long pause, and then I said, "Works for you. Here's what works for me. He and I, we're going to ditch you, and we're going to become friends." Which is exactly what happened. And I was in his wedding, and he was in mine. To the same girl. don't you think that you really could establish that big vision of ride or die, riding into the sunset with people, a sense of family in this city or in this time, in this generation, in this culture, if something like real commitment wasn't so scarce? And it's way beyond people are just afraid of commitment because it's a big risk and they might get their feelings hurt. It really seems like we are in a time when people are allergic to commitment. So it might be encouraging that I have it on good authority that the closer you get to Jesus, which a lot of us, that's our whole goal in life, the closer we get to Jesus, the more we actually feel not just inspired, but actually empowered to dedicate ourselves to people, to commit ourselves to people. It was one of the things so many people reported when they first started following Jesus, even from the very beginning. We have all these writings, these correspondence that still exist between Jesus followers talking about what Jesus was doing in their interpersonal relationships. Last week, we introduced this phrase, one another, that crops up all over these writings. It seems like community or your tribe, a village, a family is actually a natural byproduct of a closer and closer relationship with Jesus. One of the writers that wrote a letter, one of the Jesus followers, wrote about how to encourage more of it, and this is one of the excerpts from that letter. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and to good works. The more we're committed to each other, the more aware we become of what we need and where it hurts and what we're dreaming about. And the more we can together do beneficial things for our world and into our world. But then logically, in order to do that, we have to see each other from time to time. Like we're going to have to intersect our lives with each other's from time to time. And that's why the next sentence he says, let's not neglect our meeting together. I know it's tempting at times to bug out, but let's not neglect doing that as some people do. Some people, when it's not convenient for them anymore, they're gone. But let's not do that. Let's not be those people. Let's encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. So what he's trying to do there is give us an urgency for the life that we live, because before we know it, it'll be over. Before we know it, it's going to be done. So don't spend too long wandering around trying to find those people with whom you can experience the fullest matters of life, the fullest strength of life, the fullest hope that you can have and sense of security of life. Don't wander too long before you find those people. And I know that might be frustrating because you've tried and you've tried and you've tried, and those people have disappeared. Maybe right now you're not feeling the urgency to try again because maybe you don't feel like the end is near, even though, of course, we don't know when that's going to happen for any of us. But we all have experienced that moment where we wished we would have built that family, that moment when your life hit a snag or you hit rock bottom or you just had a fork in the road and you didn't know where to turn and you needed wisdom. You needed people who knew you, knew what you were capable of, and could help you, guide you, even walk with you as you take that next big risk in your life. And in those moments, you found out, and I know you've experienced this, that the people that you thought were family were really just buddies. You know what I'm talking about? It's like when your life hit bottom, or you hit a moment of confusion, or you hit that fork in the road, then they hit the eject button, or they hit the log out button, or they ghosted you. You ever had that experience? That's when you found out that you at no point actually had a family. You had people that were only committed to the point of convenience. And so what I want to envision for us and invite you into today is, why don't we start a revolution of sticking with each other? Why don't we start a commitment revolution? And it truly would be a revolution in this city and in this time. If there were a group of people who chose faithfulness over convenience, faithfulness over usefulness, maybe we could start a stick with revolution together. Do something for me. Look around the room. Just look around the room. It's not creepy if everybody does it. Look around the room. And as you're looking around the room, you see maybe some familiar faces. Maybe they're all strangers to you. But here's what I want you to imagine as you're looking around the room. If you can kind of make out the faces in the dark. What if there's 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 of these people who are precisely the family that your future needs? What if they're here? How would you know? And more powerfully, how can you be a part of making it happen? One of the reasons I love the scriptures is because it's not a collection of how good people impress God. That you can't find that in there. Instead, it's just a collection of experiences and poems written about people who've experienced how far God will go to commit to you, how far God will go to invade and uplift and rescue the lives of messed up people like me, from messed up families, and give them a hope and give them a future. And so like we're going to do every single moment of this series, we're going to look at the life of a messed up person in a messed up family and see what God can do and what kind of a family God can build, no matter what your background and challenge moving into this. Israel had just formed as a community that was something like a nation. It was the first time they'd done this. This is thousands of years ago, and you don't have to read a Bible to learn a lot about that. You can just read a history book. And so as a nation now, they needed to do what every other nation does, and they had to choose a king. But every other nation's king was an icon. You have to choose a king that communicates that your nation is not someone to be dealt with, you have to choose a king that's intimidating or charismatic. And so they chose this guy named Saul. And as far as we can tell from all the descriptions, is Saul was just some towering, like physically towering, compelling, charismatic presence. Saul walked in a room. I don't know if the sound of his voice or his sense of humor, the winning smile, but it's just like Saul's the guy. I mean, Saul is the guy. But as time went on, Saul looked the part, but he couldn't play the part. You ever meet those people? You ever feel like somebody votes for those people? It's like you look the part, but you clearly cannot play the part. And Saul was not much of a leader, even though he was given the throne. God, I think because of his mercy, decided to select a successor. He lets this little boy from a little family in a little village, he lets him know that one day you're going to be king. And David is sitting there thinking, I don't know when that's going to happen or how that's going to happen, because the king, Saul, he has heirs. And the way monarchy works is Saul dies, and his male heirs are going to be next in line for the throne. Well, a little while later, Israel now is at war with the neighboring nation, and they're not doing well. David's older brothers, his big brothers, go off to war. At one point, David is charged to go bring them food on the battlefield. He does that. He gets to the battlefield, and then he ends up killing this big giant, typical Thursday. And that is the first time that King Saul even hears of a David. But he's impressed. This little boy has done something that none of his men could muster up the courage to do. So King Saul interacts with David, and that's where I want to pick up this story in 1 Samuel 17. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked him. David said, "I'm the son of your servant, Jesse," that's my dad, "of Bethlehem." And it's the same town that you've heard of. Now, one of Saul's sons was also in that conversation, and he not only was impressed with David, but you could just tell immediately felt this connection with him. And so he goes on to say in 18 verse 4, "Jonathan, that's Saul's son, took off the robe he was wearing, gave it to David along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt." And what he's doing culturally is he's saying, "David, I want you to feel like family with me. I want you to feel like you belong in this family, in this tribe." And from then on out, they were as thick as thieves. They were like brothers. Now, Saul liked David, at least at first, because every time David went into battle, he won. And that's good for a king. So he would send David into battle. David would crush. People would applaud. Saul looks good. Sends David into battle. David would crush. People would applaud. Saul looks good. Sends David into battle. David would crush. He wins. Whatever, Saul, David's looking pretty good. He sends David into battle. David would crush. Now people are writing songs about how awesome David is. And then they start writing songs about how awesome David is and how disappointing King Saul is. It became really easy to compare how powerful David was becoming and how incapable their king was. And you know who else had a really easy time comparing David and Saul? Saul. And he went from being the charter member of the David fan club to becoming a predator of David. He wants to eradicate this guy because now he's not useful as much as he is threatening. And you'll find, if you read a lot of Saul's biography and the chronicles of his choices as a king, that seems to be the way he treated every relationship. That the moment it wasn't comfortable for him or convenient or useful for him, you might as well not exist in his world. So he secretly tries to kill David. David starts to live his life on the run. Doesn't make sense to anybody around him. Where'd he go? Jonathan, his best friend, has no idea why David's nowhere around. At one point, Jonathan tracks down David and asks him, why are you MIA? And David's like, "I'm so sorry I wasn't at your kid's birthday party. And how do I tell you? This is super awkward. Your dad he's trying to kill me." Jonathan at first doesn't believe it. So in 1 Samuel 20 verse 2, he just says, "Never. I don't want to believe that about my dad. You don't know him. Maybe there's a misunderstanding. You're not going to die. He says, look, my father doesn't do anything, great or small, without letting me know. He's grooming me as his successor. I'm in the room, right? I'm around the boardroom table. I know everything. I know my dad better than anybody. Why would he hide this from me? It isn't so. Then he goes on to say, listen, I'm going to work it out, okay? But first I need to go find out for myself. I need to set up a scenario where it'll be obvious if my dad is trying to kill you or not. And so he says, there's this upcoming banquet. David, you're supposed to be there. I'm going to come up with a good reason for you not to be there. It'll be me and my dad, and maybe that'll expose if he's got some frustrations with you. Maybe, in a moment of transparency, he'll reveal he's a little frustrated with you, We'll get to the bottom of this. So he goes to this banquet. David's not there. King Saul asks, where's David? And Jonathan says he's got some family biz. He can't be here. Expecting King Saul to be like, that's cool. I hope it all works out. His family's okay. Instead, Saul responds, what? He's got to die. It's a direct translation of the Hebrew. Jonathan does not want to believe this about his dad. Would you? He goes on in 1 Samuel 20, verse 32. Why should he be put to death? What has he done? Jonathan asked his father, but Saul hurled his spear at him to kill his own son. Then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. The moment his own son wasn't useful for him, he had to get rid of him. He wanted him gone. Now, I hope you have not experienced that kind of moment in your life, but maybe you've experienced something close to it. I'm not surprised that our three youngest generations right now, at least in the West, really struggle with commitment because we have not been raised to expect it. Not that we don't long for it, I don't know that we've been raised to expect it. Some of you were raised with the idea that you had to find your dream job. And by the way, I hope you do. But I hope you also know that your dream becomes a reality very simply through habit, through risk, through hard work. That's how dreams become life, okay? But many of us believe that all we need is a dream and Kickstarter, not a job. All we need is a dream, and the moment it becomes difficult, then we just have to wait a little bit longer until the planets align and we are discovered. Many of us believe we were raised with this promise of overnight success. We were raised with some expectation that if it's right, it's going to go viral, that there's a pill for every pain and a pill for every extra pound that you don't want. And then we were raised in a culture and given the gift of a no-fault divorce. And so if you're given a no-fault divorce, then you really don't have to have a commitment marriage. So I don't know that we've been raised with the expectation of commitment, even though our souls have a deep longing for it. I talk with entrepreneurs a lot, organizational leaders, and the good news is it's actually pretty easy to stand out in today's job market because they look at the youngest generation now entering the job market and they see so much promise, but what they don't find very often is a commitment to the process. So all of the potential is locked behind this door, this lock of commitment. I'm in recovery, which I've been very vulnerable about before. Sex addiction, I've been sober for 16 years and I'm proud of that. And there's a lot of reasons that people often find those kinds of addictive patterns appealing. Lots of different reasons that people find themselves there. But the results of that kind of addictive pattern are often the same. And it's that those people who are addicted to those kinds of patterns, especially pornography and some of those other ways that we use our sexual addiction, often what happens is we become extremely satisfied with the momentary thrill of climax, which means that we miss out on the exhilaration of real intimacy. It terrifies us. We don't understand why we have to go through the challenge of commitment with the same person and the same body and the same face for a lifelong of strength. I know why sometimes commitment is hard to find, even though our souls so deeply long for it. You may not be somebody who is perpetuating the challenge of commitment. Maybe you are somebody who's actively looking for it, but you've been hurt by a world that doesn't know how to do it. You have been rejected by a string of people who have dismissed you or reduced you or ignored you when you stopped being beneficial for them. You stopped being convenient for them. Your story was too messy for that church. Your story was too complicated for that friendship, and you might as well not exist in their world anymore. I know why we don't expect to see commitment in our lives, even though our souls so deeply long for it. Jonathan's dad would have taken anybody out who stood in his way, but Jonathan wanted to create a different story. And you have a choice from this point forward to create a different story. 1 Samuel 23, verse 16, Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength, not just in Jonathan's friendship, but in God. They had something transcendent to tap into. Don't be afraid, Jonathan said, my father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel. And then listen to this commitment. I will be second to you. If I have to be humbled so that you can be strengthened, I'll do it. If I have to fall behind so that you can move forward, I'll commit to it. And he says, even my father Saul knows that this is inevitable. This is where everything is going. And the two of them made, and this is a heavy word, a covenant before the Lord. A life-changing commitment. A commitment that assumes there will be pain. A commitment that assumes there will be moments when this is not comfortable, this is not convenient, but I'm going to stay. A commitment that assumes that there will be times when everybody else will run and I will run in. A commitment that assumes that one day one of us will die and the other one will be left and I will stay. I commit. I will be faithful. And he did it at a time when David wasn't just politically inconvenient. David was dangerous for Jonathan. Life-threatening for Jonathan. Saul wouldn't have made this commitment with anybody. So why would Jonathan choose this kind of tribe, this kind of village, this kind of family above his own kin? And I think it's because he knew that family is not built on usefulness. Family is built on faithfulness. You will not build a family that your future desperately needs if all of your relationships are predicated on their usefulness. Family is built with faithfulness. The only thing stronger than the family that you got is a family that you would choose to stick with. Saul saw all of the relationships in his life, even his relationship with God, in terms of how useful they were to him. And Jonathan and David, they decided to form a new legacy. And it mattered. A little while later, they enter into this big battle, between Israel and the Philistine army. And Saul's 3 sons are killed, including Jonathan. And Saul, because this is the life he built for himself, is left alone. He's injured at this point in the battle. He decides to take his own life. And then after a series of events, because of his popularity and because of his military potential, David is actually named the king. And then he does the thing that Saul wasn't able to do. He actually led them to secured victory and for a while some safety neighboring this other nation. And at one point, after the victory, there's this prayer that David documented for us in 2 Samuel verse 7. Who am I, sovereign Lord who's in charge of it all? And what is my family that you've brought me this far? It's another way of saying, like, I don't know why you chose me. Why would you be faithful to me? You don't need me. Like, I definitely throw you some curveballs, God, from time to time. And you still decided to be why, God, would you be faithful to me? Why would you choose me? And what we see through the course of David's life is that God's faithfulness to him not just inspires David, but I think empowers David to provide faithfulness to the people around him. 2 Samuel 9, verse 3, David asked, is there no one still alive from the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness? I want to model this for somebody. Ziba, which I hope you have a friend named Ziba, who's in his cabinet there, so to speak. Ziba answered the king, there's still a son of Jonathan. He's lame in both feet. So this is his best friend who's passed away, his best friend's son. What you find if you read the story is that when this battle that took the life of this son's grandfather and his dad, in that battle there was a nursemaid that was holding this little baby boy, and she dropped him running for her life, and it broke both of his legs. And that's not something they medically could have attended to back then, so he's lame in both feet is the way that they described him, which, by the way, is sort of a death sentence, and superstitiously people believed if you had some sort of physical challenges, it means the gods don't love you and you did something wrong. So there's what David decides to do with this family member of the last royal bloodline. In 2 Samuel 9, verse 6, when Mephibosheth, what a name, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor, which is what he should have done. David said, Mephibosheth, which you have to practice that if you're going to shout it. "At your service," he replied. "Don't be afraid," the king said. Of course he's afraid because there's only one way this goes. It is customary for the new family line, royal family line, to eradicate everybody in the bloodline of the predecessor. So Mephibosheth knows he's going there to be killed. "Don't be afraid," David said to him, "for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan." He was like family to me. "I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. You now will be like family to me." By the way, what David is restoring to Mephibosheth is the land where he was raised, the estate that belonged to his family. But he didn't have access to it anymore unless the king allowed him access, which for some of us is going to sound incredibly familiar. We actually believe that God's love and God's sacrifice and God's faithfulness to us has allowed us access to become who we really are, but aren't quite yet, and allow us to be where we belong, but aren't quite yet. The king has given us access to life as it's supposed to be for us. And David did not get this idea from his dad. Jonathan certainly didn't get this idea from his dad. They were both drawing from their experience with a God who would stick with them. You'll be like family to me. I will adopt you. Now, most of the people that we get to serve and interact with here on a Sunday know a thing or two about rejection, don't we? Anybody ever been rejected, ever? Welcome to Los Angeles. It's in like the welcome pack you get from the post office. You get like the Lowe's coupon and the U-Haul boxes coupon and then a rejection letter right away. Is that Aaron Michnowski? I need you with me all the time. So much funnier when I'm around you. Thank you, Aaron. We know a thing or two about rejection in the city, we do, and what's harder to find is a source of faithfulness and commitment in this city. And that's why I'm just going to be direct. To those of you who are followers of Jesus, you should be better at this than anybody. How dare we drift in and out of faith community when for some people this is the only place in the whole city they can find any semblance of faithfulness and commitment. So how about it? How about we build a family that our future is depending on, our future would want us to build? And you don't have to choose this family or whoever's in this room, this family. You don't have to choose this one. Just make sure that when you choose a family, you choose people who obviously are committed to you beyond the point of convenience. Obviously, choose those people. And by the way, and you know this intuitively, don't just wait for somebody else's faithfulness to commit. You're going to have to take a risk. You're going to have to choose faithfulness first, too, because we need it from you. You're going to have to choose that kind of commitment that other people need in the family. I know we pass through places like this, especially at the moment. It's just not really comfortable or convenient, or we don't really like the way we're doing things, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to move to something else that seems comfortable and convenient for this season in my life and these preferences I have in my life. I'm just going to move on. That's not building an expectation for commitment in this season. And I think that we need to start a revolution for something different. It's going to be really easy to find a reason to leave. A reason to leave the marriage that you're in, a reason to leave the friendship that you might be in. Definitely easy to find a reason to leave a church. If you did not want to be here today, you had 10 reasons to leave before you came in this room today. I know that. It's okay. It's like, I don't like, now the pastor's wearing these big t-shirts. Like, he's super cool. I get it. Somebody had a gift certificate to Urban Outfitters. Can't bring coffee into the auditorium? How could God be any part of that? There are lightsabers on the stage now. I'm gone. If you want to leave, you already found a reason to do it. I know you did. That's why you laughed so much. I'm just saying what you're thinking. If you want to leave, you already found a reason to do it. That's easy. That's normal. It's actually also pretty easy to find a reason to stay. Look around the room again. You're sitting next to the reason that you should stay. Unless maybe you're sitting next to the reason you think you should leave. Then maybe think about the person on the other side of you for just a second. I'm not telling you to choose commitment because it's just a nice thing to do or it's virtuous. I'm telling you to do this because it is a means to an end that our humanity needs. If we do not choose commitment, then it's going to be very difficult for us to create islands of security in this ocean of rejection. You know, one of the benefits that I have of being a guy on a microphone is I get an inordinate amount of credit. And I also get an inordinate amount of complaints, but that's normal for leadership. I really am not whining about that. But I get credit for things that I had very little to do with. And over the last 2 weeks, as we've moved into this new space, there's been a lot of you who've said congratulations and way to go. And that really means a lot to me. It truly does. And I do play a big part in the decisions we've made leading to here. I own that. But I also know, and you probably know, that commitment has a name, and it's not just Joseph. I did not move a tent to get us here. I did not put up a single light this morning. I did not buy a single toy in Rad City. I do not know ASL like Grace does right down here. Commitment has a name. It has a lot of names, hundreds of names in this space. People who committed so much to create space for you that they showed up hours before you got here. Weeks, years. Some of them showed up years before you got here because they're so committed to creating space for you and for you to find family. Commitment has a name, and it might be yours too. Your name is the commitment that somebody else needs. So maybe we start a revolution of sticking with each other because it is better for our humanity than the free-floating, unfettered, self-serving individualism that we've become so accustomed to in our time and in this city. Does that sound right to anybody? Does that make sense to anybody? Okay. So, let's fill in this blank this morning. I want to build a family, because you got to take ownership of it. I want to build a family, so I will be faithful, because that's what builds families. I will be faithful by blank. You get to decide. I will show up. I will commit. I will be faithful by blank. What part will you play in this? I'll be honest, with some of you, it's just about reconciling a relationship that you've sort of ghosted for a while, and maybe even going back to a church that you used to be a part of. Or just a relationship or a friendship that when it got a little messy and got uncomfortable, you pieced out. Or maybe when they just disagreed with you politically, you pieced out. It might mean, jumping in and serving alongside people to show your commitment to create space for other people to find family. It might mean pitching in financially. That's how you would fill in that blank. It might just simply mean that today, the best you can do, and this would be just as courageous, is to stop the endless search for some new family and begin showing up here until you find and build that family. Maybe it means jumping into a group, jumping into Starting Point. I don't know. Find it. It's here for you. It's on the other side of commitment. The potential for the future that you need is just on the other side of commitment. And selfishly, I'll say, I really want you to find relationships here, because that means I can come up on this stage and screw up for several weeks in a row, and you'll probably still come back because it's where your family is. Further than that, I can come up here and say things that nudge you a little bit, and you don't like, and you don't agree with, and you guys can get with your family outside these doors, go out to lunch, and make fun of me all you want. That's the luxury of you being there and me being here. I want you to find family. I think God wants to give you and me a family that we long for, but it cannot be built on simply what it can do for us. It's got to be built on what we can do when we are faithful and we are committed to do something together. What we can do when we stick with one another. Would you stand up with me? I don't want you to simply find people who make you happy. I am desperate for you to find people who are committed to you, to making you stronger. And maybe you would be committed to making them stronger, giving them hope, and giving them solid ground to stand on as we gaze into this bright future that God has for us together. Let me pray for you. God, thank you that you've been faithful to us. And sometimes I question that. because my life's not comfortable, it's not convenient. God, where'd you go? It's not lining up the way I thought it would. God, you disagree with me on this point. God, I've messed up so tragically. How could you possibly love me, want to be around me? But that's where, God, my faith will remind me of your faithfulness. I will trust, even when sometimes it doesn't make sense, that you're not going anywhere. And God, that also is the expectation that we want to build together in this community, that even when sometimes it doesn't quite make sense, and sometimes it's uncomfortable, and sometimes it's painful, and the easiest thing to do would be to find a reason to leave. God, we would trust, God, that by being faithful with each other, we can actually become the family that not just we need, God, but this city needs, our generation needs. Jesus, thank you that you've made a way for all of that to happen. And we pray this in your name. Amen.
Thank you for listening. For more information, follow us on social media at Radius Church LA and visit us on the web at radius.la.